What if planning for death could actually help you live more fully? In this episode of The Legacy of Love, I sit down with death doula Jill McClennen, who shares her powerful story of caring for her dying grandmother while raising her newborn, and how that moment cracked her open and changed her life. I know that death for me has just been the ultimate truth serum and just has had a ripple effect in my personal life. So it was so sweet to connect with Jill on her story. We explore what most people get wrong about dying and why so many avoid the conversation. We also discuss how death doulas can provide emotional support, advocacy, and comfort during the most sacred transition. As a mother, as a professional fiduciary working in end of life care, this conversation hit home for me. It's not just about how we die, it's about how we live with intention while we're here. You're going to want to listen to this one. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Jill, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I love to talk about death and dying and grief and all that good stuff.
Oh, well, I do too. So, yeah, thank you for being here. You're the kind of first death doula to come on the podcast. And before we kind of dive into kind of defining for listeners what a death doula is, I would love to kind of start out with just getting to know what brought you to this work. Why like end of life care? What's death and dying? Why does this have such meaning and purpose in your life?
Well, I originally am from New Jersey, but I was living in California. I lived in San Francisco. My husband and I, we were both pastry chefs, actually still are pastry chefs. And we got married and decided we wanted to open a bakery. And so we looked around San Francisco and realized we could not afford it. So I was talking with my grandmother one day on the phone. She was getting ready to turn 90. And my grandmother basically raised me. We were very close. And so she said, well, why don't you move back home? You could live with me. That'll keep me in my house because I don't want to leave. And then you could open your bakery in New Jersey. So that's what I did. I picked up my husband and our cat and packed a minivan, drove all the way across the country and moved back home to New Jersey. About a week, literally about a week after we moved home, my grandmother said, found this weird lump in my like shoulder and I don't know what it is. And so we went to the doctor. They said it's probably not cancer because it's like a strange location for somebody in their 90s to have cancer, but we're going to, go in, do a biopsy, all that. And the doctor came out and he said, actually, I was wrong. It is cancer. And so 90-year-old woman, we went down this journey of about 4 years of surgery and radiation and all these different treatments. And there's a lot of things that I look back on now that I would have probably done a little bit differently if I would have known better, but I didn't know better. And the last month of her life, I had a 6-month-old baby. He was adorable. And
Oh.
my grandmother ended up on hospice. And so I really dove into like end of life caregiving for that last month. And I realized very quickly that it was not what I thought it was going to be. It doesn't look like it does in television and movies.
Yeah.
And so thankfully, hospice was so amazing. They came right in, answered all my questions. I was so confused the first night I was home with her. She was up in the middle of the night, like first night that she was home on hospice. She'd been in the hospital for a couple days. And she says to me, my granddaughter has a baby the same age as yours. Because, of course, I've got the baby. I mean, what do you do with a 6-month-old in the middle of the night? They're always with you.
Yeah.
And I said, no, but I am your granddaughter. And she said, no, you're not. You're the nurse. And I was like, oh, what is going on here? And so the experience, the more that I relaxed into it, the more that I started to realize that her talking to other people, her maybe not knowing who I am, having agitation, sometimes being really angry at me, which she was never an angry, mean person, that it was
Mm.
all part of the natural process of a person's body dying.
Mm.
Then I was able to actually relax into it and get curious and actually have conversations with her. So when she would say to me, "You don't hear those women behind you singing?" Nope, don't hear anything, but tell me more about it. What do they look like? What does it sound like? Like, how many of them is there? Rather than getting scared and anxious, I got curious. And then we had these moments that were really beautiful, and I was able to enjoy the experience. I still didn't want her to die, but the reality is she was 94 at that point. Like, I mean, how long
Yeah.
do you think somebody's going to live?
Yeah.
Like,
That's a full life.
it was a very full life. And
Yeah.
so there was still the part of me that was like, I don't want my grandmother to die. I'm sad that she's dying, but also this is part of the natural human life, right? I had this little six
Yeah.
month old baby, and I was like, well, of course, like she needs to die at some point, even if I don't want her to. But the more I relaxed into it, the more I was like, this is amazing. This is a really amazing experience. And so by the time that she died, I felt completely at peace with it. I was so happy that I had had those 4 years, that especially I had had that last month with her, that I didn't run away from it, that I wasn't afraid and freaked out and saying, I can't do this. I was showing up for it. And I said to my husband then, I think I want to be a hospice nurse. And he was like, all right, honey, whatever you want. But at that point, we had a bakery. We had a 6 month old baby. It was like not good timing to basically,
Go back to nursing school. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like I have an associate's degree in culinary arts and baking, but like I would have had to have started literally from the beginning. I was willing to do it, but not right then. And then life just kept happening. We ended up getting pregnant with our second child. We had to close our bakery, partially because once my grandmother died and then we had like all the bills to pay, we were like,
Yeah.
oh, this mom and pop business thing doesn't work in our country anymore. Like we can't
Yeah.
live off of the income that we're making. So my husband had to go get a job. It just the whole thing. So I was like, we're done with this bakery. We're moving on. So we closed the bakery. We moved. I got a new job. I loved my job. I've been teaching a job training program for the last 10 years. I love it. But there still was like that little thing in the back of my head. And then, of course, the closer I got to 40, I thought, I can't be in the kitchen till I'm 65. Like, I
Yeah.
can't. The kitchens are hard work. And even though I was teaching a job training program, I was still like working in a kitchen. We are a full functioning kitchen. It's a soup kitchen. We feed all the halfway houses and shelters in the city that we're in. Like, it's a lot of work.
Mm.
And so as I was already starting to kind of like question, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? Then I heard somebody say they were a death doula. And it was 2019. I still remember fall of 2019, right before my birthday. And they said death doula, and like it just like lit me up. I was like,
Yeah. It
oh,
just
oh,
clicked.
that's it. That's what I'm supposed to do. And so now here I am, 4 and some change years later, and I have fully transitioned into my role as a death doula. I do still teach a little bit. I teach one specific class because, again, I just love it. I can't get away from it. But a lot of the work that I do now is just around death and dying and grief and helping people understand that it is a normal, natural part of life. It is still sad, but it's normal and it's natural, and we all have to face it at some point.
Oh, I love your story. We have a lot in common because
Nice.
after witnessing my first death too, that was my experience. I thought I would become a hospice nurse. There was just this real kind of leaning in, and I
Uh-huh.
can only imagine I didn't have that also layered with kind of just being 6 months postpartum, where at least my journey for becoming a mother has been like a total just cracking my heart open and just feeling so connected to all of life. So I'm like, I can just imagine that being like you're standing kind of at the portals, the two portals of life, bringing life in and also like letting go at the same time. That's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Thank you.
So I really want to kind of define and help listeners understand, and even for myself, what is a death doula? Like, how do you start working with clients? When do you start working with clients? More death doulas have kind of been surrounding in my professional network. I
Mhm.
haven't yet like worked alongside a death doula with any of my clients. So I would love to kind of just define what that role is, how you sit in your clients' lives and bring such important work and support to them.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest, I'd say, battle in being a
Mm-hmm.
death doula is getting people to understand what we actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, really, we've always been doing this work. Typically women, right? We've always had people in our communities that have cared for people who are having babies, that have also cared for the sick and the dying and helped families through that whole process. And so the work itself is not new, but doing it as a profession is something that is newer in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when I try to explain to people the work that I do, they'll say, well, oh, it sounds like hospice and what hospice does. In a lot of ways, there is overlap in what we do, but it is different. So first, the biggest difference is death doulas do completely non-medical care. So we're not going to come in and mess with anybody's medications. We're not going to do wound care. We're not going to do like those types of things that hospice will still do.
Mm-hmm.
You provide more of the emotional support. Sometimes I would say you could say maybe practical support, helping people get clear on what's important to them at the end of life, getting that down in writing, having these conversations with their family members, having the conversations with their medical team. Because sometimes we see, where again, I look back at my grandmother. Why did anybody think that giving a 90-year-old radiation was a good idea?
Yeah.
And then honestly, I don't think it extended her life. That's really what ended up killing her was an infection from the radiation. And so if I would have known then what I know now, I would have asked more questions and just said, hey, what will happen if we just give her surgery? Just take out as much as you can and then give her quality of life for the last 4 years. What's the outcome of that? But I didn't know to ask that question. So that's a lot of what we do as well, is really most death doulas at this point, we're not actually working with clients, not at least in the way that we envisioned we would be,
Mm.
because most people still don't know what we do. It's not like somebody is saying, oh, my loved one got a terminal diagnosis. I'm going to search Google for a death doula in my area to help support us through the process. Like that's not really happening. And
Mm-hmm.
so most of us are just really out in our communities educating. I do a lot of classes. My library, my local library has been really amazing. And it's really partially that they were like, we'll give this a try. And then the community has really been like, no, these classes are helpful. I just did one on the science of death, which I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to be interested in this. And then it was the most, I think we had like 33 people show up for it because
Mm.
people really wanted to know like the signs, the physical signs of what a body is going to experience as it's dying. Because again, we don't see it in real life. And so there's an interest, I think, in a lot of death doulas of like going out into the communities and educating around the fact that number one, we're all going to die. We're all going to face it. Avoiding that thought is not going to help us. What we really need to do is think about it and prepare for it and have the conversations. And so that's why too, when somebody says, well, when should I hire a death doula?
Mm-hmm.
Is it like the last couple weeks of life? And I'm like, yeah, you could. But honestly, the ideal time to hire a death doula is now. Doesn't matter what age
Mm.
you are. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're at. The best time to hire a death doula to at least get the process started is right now so that you can have the conversation, think about what's important to you. Because yes, maybe say half of us are going to have like an illness and there's going to be like a outcome that we're expecting. The other half of us are probably going to have an accident, a sudden death, a sudden illness where we're not going to have the ability to think through what do I want? It's going to be
Mm.
like, hey, we need to decide right now. Do you want to be intubated? Or asking your spouse or your parents or your siblings, whoever it is that's closest to you, do they want to be intubated? Do they want, chest compressions if their heart were to stop? Do they want this, that, and the other? And people are saying, I have no idea because we've never thought about it. We've never talked about it. And so hiring a death doula
Mm.
earlier on so that we can get clear so that whenever that time comes that we have to know this information, we already have thought about it. We've already talked about it. And I know that seems scary and overwhelming to some people. Like, well, I don't want to think about those things. Well, why not? Thinking about
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to make it happen, right? Like, yes, it can be a little bit emotional. But what I've been learning the last few years, especially, I used to be one of those people that was very uncomfortable when I cried. Like I didn't like crying. I would do everything I could to stop myself from crying.
Mm.
Crying made me very uncomfortable. And now I'm almost at that point of like embracing it, that when it does happen, like I listened to a podcast this morning that like made me cry a little bit. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I'm crying. I'm feeling things. Like, isn't this great? But it took me a while to get there. And so now when I talk to people and I say, yes, talking about these things, it will bring up some emotions. You know, you may cry a little bit.
Mm.
Okay, so what? Crying is not a bad thing. And if anything, I find that the conversations that people will now have, if they start this conversation with their friends and family, they'll be the most memorable. The connection and the bond that people develop having these conversations is so much deeper than our average conversation. And so it's not just that having the conversation will prepare us, it really helps us bond with the people that we love the most and have conversations that can be so beautiful and so deep and cover topics that we've never talked about before. Because it's not just, you know, what do we want at the end of life? Then we start talking about like other experiences that we've had or why we believe this thing. And then we tell stories, and it's just a beautiful experience. But it's like a lot of things in life. I think, you know, my daughter, before she has to get one of her like vaccination shots, it's like the hour leading up to it is a nightmare. She's screaming, she's crying, she's on the floor. I'm like pulling her out from underneath furniture. And then she gets the shot and she goes, oh, that wasn't bad. And then they give her little sticker and her Band-Aid and her lollipop, and then off we go. And she's like totally fine. But the hour leading up to it is torture. And I'm like, you are making yourself more miserable by being afraid of this thing than the thing actually makes you feel bad, right? And so
Right.
I find that's a lot of it with this conversation, is that once we start the conversation, people are like, oh, that wasn't bad. That was actually really nice. I really enjoyed a lot of that. But it's that leading up to it that they're like, I don't know, I'm scared, I can't bring it up. How do we do this? But that's why death doulas, not all, but a lot of us, that's why we help you with it, right? But like, we'll help you get the conversation flowing. We'll help you get clear on what you want before you have to sit down. Like, that's part of the work that we do. So that's something that I really want people to understand, is that it's not just the end of life. It's preparing ourselves for the inevitable.
Well, I had a doula for my birth. And, one of the things that's assigned to the doula is setting up a birth plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, so the picture that you painted, I'm like, I'm totally following. Hopefully, listeners are too. But it's like, yeah, figuring out what you want and kind of planning for different scenarios. Like you're saying, do you want to be intubated? Most people don't sit around thinking those things or even know to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's such an important gift you can give people. I work with clients in the planning phase, and sometimes, especially if I'm being named as an agent under their advanced healthcare directive. So if I would have any, healthcare decision making powers, those are kind of questions that I'm having as well with clients. So I just love this kind of extra layer, and that clients can kind of proactively work with a death doula. I think I just assumed in the name, oh, you're going to be waiting until like you either get a diagnosis or referred to hospice, and then it makes sense to kind of bring you on to the team. But do you also work with people in that way? Like sometimes it is that scenario where family, is just found out and there's been a diagnosis and a referral to hospice. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's when you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you only work kind of physically with clients, or you can also work virtually?
Yeah. So actually, a lot of the work that I've done has been virtual, partially because, again, locally to me, there's not as many people searching for death doulas. And I have a client that lives out in the Midwest, found me online. We've been working together. They had a diagnosis of 6 months or less to live, and it's been a year and a half.
Yeah.
And we're still meeting each other every
Oh, yeah.
week on Zoom. But,
Yes.
you know, it's not like they are going to live a lot longer. I mean, we don't know how much longer,
Yeah.
but so it was just kind of funny where I thought, we weren't going to leave work together for a couple months, because when they contacted me, they were like, they just told me I had 6 months left or less. And now that's not the case. But so I do work with people virtually. And some of the work too that I do, again, it's not the work that I always envisioned I was going to do when I became a death doula, but I was finding that people's loved ones are getting the terminal diagnosis and they're having a hard time processing. What am I going to do? I like, my person's going to die. I don't know how to work through this. And so I've been working with some people, again, mainly virtually, where we just meet and we talk through what they're experiencing. One woman in particular is like, her grandfather lives actually in Philly, so like really close to me, but she was like, my grandpa, like, no way will he
Yeah,
ever
he's not
talk to you.
open.
Yeah, he's not open to it. But I need the help and I don't live locally to him anymore. And so like we're processing what she's going through, not so much working with her grandfather. And so it's really, it is, again, that's why it's partially hard to even explain what death doulas do, because at this point, I think all of us are figuring it out. My mentor, she only works with people that are like terminal diagnosis, already on hospice, like that's it. That's all she works with. But again, she's in LA, so I don't think she's having as much of a struggle to find clients. Like, I couldn't only work with people like that unless I wanted to just like not work with anybody. So I opened myself up a little bit more to like, well, what kind of fits into the role that I serve? And so I'll work with people around grief as well, because sometimes that's when we need the most support, is after somebody dies. So I try, and that's why I think doula really fits.
It really does,
Right.
because
That's what a doula does.
yeah,
Before,
you've
during, and
got the
after
prep
birth.
before birth, and then I think also the postpartum. There's so much focus on the birth,
Mm-hmm.
similar to death. There's so much focus on the death, and then it's like sometimes you need more support. Well,
After.
typically you actually need a lot more support postpartum and after death, right?
For sure. And it's the area that I think it's most overlooked, because leading up to death, leading up to birth, you're right, there's like so much focus. And I do an end of life care plan with people, just similar to a birth plan, right? Where everything's down in writing and we prepare it and I make sure that everybody has it and we have the conversations and all this stuff. And then somebody dies and now all of a sudden their caregivers are alone. And there's no support. There's no people showing up and checking in and asking how they're doing and, making sure that they're okay with that significant change. And as a new mom, I know that was the hardest part for me,
Yeah.
where, yeah, it was wonderful. Like, I loved my baby so much, but I also was so alone. It was such a huge change for me. My husband, not so much, and like, and I'm not mad at him for it, but like, he was still going to the bakery and he was still doing his thing. And I'm like covered in milk and exhausted and
Yeah.
like up all night. And my life was so different, and yet he was still like off doing whatever he needed to do. And so it was very different and it was difficult. It was hard for me. And at that point, so my son is 13. So, again, we're talking like this is like 13, 14 years ago. I'd heard of birth doulas, but like I didn't know anybody that used one. I didn't even know any. Now I feel like I probably can rattle off 5 birth doulas, and almost everybody I know that's like having babies around now are using birth doulas. And I think death doulas are going to be the same thing,
Yeah.
where it's starting to get out into the culture, right? I feel like now at least everybody's heard of a death doula, even if they've not worked with one, they've at least heard of one. And so the more that people start to use them, then they start saying to their friends and family, like, oh, mom got a terminal diagnosis. You might want to look into getting a death doula because it's really helpful. I used one. It's really helpful. That's going to be the thing that's really going to shift it the most. But a lot of my work now, I volunteer at 2 different hospitals and I work with their palliative care team. And so I do get to work with people of all stages of illnesses, whether they're just getting the diagnosis and they're being told, we're going to do treatment, but, it might not go great. We might have to look at these other things, all the way up to people that are actively dying and they have nobody. And so when I'm in the hospital, I'll sit with them and hold their hand and try the best that I can to talk to them so that they know that I'm here. But that's why really knowing somebody beforehand can be so helpful. So even if
Yeah.
a family calls me and they say, hey, mom just got put on hospice. Okay, well, I don't know anything about mom. I don't know what she likes. I don't know what she doesn't like. Because one of the things that and this might sound weird to some people, it's very boring to sit with somebody that's dying in that, like, they're not communicating with you, right? Most of the
Yeah.
time, they're completely unconscious. You're not going to be on your phone. You're not going to be reading a book to yourself. Like, what are you doing? And so I was just sitting there and I was like, oh, I'm like literally just sitting here staring at this person. And I know that they can hear, right? Hearing is one of the things they say
Mhm.
goes at the end. So I wanted to talk to them so they could hear my voice, that they can know I'm there. Well, I don't know anything about them. So then I was trying to read books to people, but then I was like, well, I don't want to read this book. I don't know what they like. So when my aunt was dying, I knew her so well that I knew that she used to always give me books when I was a child. So I know what her favorite books were. So I ended up sitting
Mm.
and reading A Wrinkle in Time to her.
Mm.
And it was good for me because it gave me something to do while I was sitting and holding her hand. And then it allowed me to have a way for her to hear my voice, to hear that I was there, to also, when you go in the hospital, they always have the TV on. And I'm like, she does not want to hear The View. Like, I
Right.
guarantee I know her. This is not what she wants right now. But again, if we don't know the person, that's what they do. They just turn on the TV to have like some noise. And so I automatically turned off the TV, tried to find some classical music because I know that's what she likes, put some
Mm.
classical music on in the background, and I sat and I read for hours until she died.
Mm.
And it's hard to do that if you don't know the person at all. And so that's why I really like to sit down with people. That's part of what I do in the end of life care plan. What kind of music do you like? What kind of books do you like? Do you like aromatherapy? Do you not like smells? Do you like fresh flowers? What is it that you like, so that I can set your space up and make it more of a ritual space for
Mm.
somebody and for their families as well. Sometimes too in the hospital, the families are like 18 feet away. They're like standing as far back away from the bed as they can. I
Mm.
go over, I'm like, no, come on. You can come sit with me. You can hold their hand. Like, it's okay. It's okay to hold their hand. It's okay to rest a hand on their chest or rest a hand on their forehead. Like, you're not going to hurt them. It's okay. But sometimes people need that encouragement. Like, you sure it's all right? I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, we can do this and we can do it together. So I encourage them to also sit and be close to their loved one, not so like, I don't know what to do. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt them. And so I don't want to get too close. So that's a lot of the work that I do.
Oh,
And I
it's so
love it. And
important.
obviously I get excited and like my hands are going. I love this work.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, especially, with my clients where I am the, healthcare decision maker. And at this point, I don't have any clients where I'm currently active in that role. My last client passed, actually, I was 40 weeks pregnant, still visiting her when she was on hospice, and she passed 2 weeks before I gave birth to my daughter. But it was all similar of that. I knew her well. I worked alongside of her for, 2+ years, everything that she loved. And she was a very private person. It made sense that she would want to pass by herself. She lived in a beautiful boarding care. Like, it was quiet. She had the music playing, no TV. And, those things matter so much, right? I mean, so much of like creating that space, versus just, I guess it's like, you can't cookie cutter this,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And for me, that's one of the things where I lean into death and the dying process. I find that as we kind of go into that, I don't know, that portal, for me, I get this sense of timelessness, and it's really being forced into the present moment. but kind of through that death, I always feel like it just makes life that much more vibrant.
Hmm.
And I'm assuming that through, all your deaths, personal and professional, that you've been witness to, I mean, it must just bring that to life more, right?
Yeah, I tell people, because a lot of times they'll say, like, isn't it sad when somebody that you're caring for dies? And I'm like, well, of course it is sad. But I feel so honored and like it's such a gift to me that somebody allows me into that space with them that is so
Yeah.
intimate, that is so personal. And right now, actually, I'm working with a friend of mine. We've known each other for 7 years, but we basically saw each other like once a week at a event that we would go to regularly. That stopped during COVID. So I've only seen him a handful of times, since COVID started. But we were friends. I would have for sure called him a friend. But now it's really interesting because our friendship is deepening so much, and he's going to die
Mm.
in probably a few weeks.
Mm.
And I'm getting to know him so much better on like a whole different personal level, all about his life growing up, all kinds of stuff. And so I was actually just thinking about it this morning of how in some ways sad it is that I'm getting to know him so well and then he's going to die, but also how beautiful it is that I'm getting to know him in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to before. Because
Mm.
as people are dying, their walls really do come down. They're less afraid to be vulnerable. They share things that they maybe would have never shared before. It's just a space that is like no other in a human's existence. And it really is beautiful. And it's a gift to be invited into that space with somebody.
Mm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? It's really like such an honor and such a gift. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm curious because I think you're spending more time in the death space than me. So I'm curious what kind of self-care practices you have, for just trying to avoid the burnout, taking care of yourself. I think that that is a piece that comes with, the work that we do of living in this space, that it can be so outwardly focused on, our clients, and it can really kind of take us sometimes down a path of not focusing on our own emotional well-being and maybe our own grief that we're carrying. So I'd be curious if you have any advice or anything to share with listeners that are also professionals in this space.
Yeah, it's a great question because I do think that most of us don't have great self-care practices and that
Yeah.
it's not taught to us, like we're not taught as children how to care for ourselves in that way. Brush your teeth, sure, but like the other part of it, it's new for a lot of us. So when you mentioned grief too, that was one thing that I
Mm.
found in that I was never afraid of death. I was never afraid of dying.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't realize is that I had some fears within me. First off, about my children dying, my worst
Yeah.
nightmare, right?
Yeah.
I had some grief that I had been holding on to that I had never processed. And so there's this way that doing this work touches on some of those things.
Mm.
And I had to really sit with it and I had to work through it and I had to process it. And so, especially the grief, my grandfather died when I was 4. I didn't have my father in my life. So he was like my main male figure.
Mm.
And then he
Mm.
died. And because I was so young, my family did what most families do when a child is involved with a death. They don't talk about it. I didn't go to the
Yeah.
funeral. Nobody even really told me he died. He just kind of disappeared one day and didn't come back.
Wow.
And they thought that they were doing what was best. So I'm not mad at anybody for it. But it left me with a lot of unprocessed grief and anger, right? Anger that I didn't even realize and that I would not have ever admitted out loud that I was like angry at him for leaving me. Like there was all these things that as I started learning about death and dying and grief, that I was like, oh, ooh, that's in there. Okay, I feel that. I feel it coming
Mm-hmm.
up. And so I created my own ritual around that one specific thing where I was like, I need to work with this grief that I'm holding, that I've been holding for a
Mm.
long time. And that's one of the things that I actually just love to do with people in general is like help people create their own rituals that make sense for them because
Mm.
ritual is important for humans, right? Like it
Yeah.
is just a part of our existence.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, there's not one cookie cutter. Like I can't say this is your grief ritual, do it.
Yeah.
Like I can give you the one that I did, but like change it for what fits for you. And so I did a whole ritual around like connecting with my grandfather, releasing that grief that I'd been holding for so long, forgiving myself for poor decisions that I made because I didn't realize that I was angry and grieving the fact that I had no man in my life, right? Like all these things I had to work through. So like some of it is definitely going to be that as those things happen, right, as they get touched on throughout our work, acknowledging it and honoring it
Mm.
and like processing it as best as we can, whether it's getting a therapist, you know, doing some kind of ritual, like whatever you need. But the best thing really is just to have those self-care practices in place that you do regularly so that you're, you know, I've heard somebody I think one time call it like spiritual hygiene, right? It's like
Yeah.
brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth once is not going to do anything. You need to brush your teeth every day. You need to brush probably twice a day in order to really get the benefits. And so my self-care practice is making sure that in the mornings I wake up before the rest of my house so that I have time to myself to do movement. I think movement is really important
Mm.
for our emotions as well as our body to like really move through those things. You know, having a meditation or a prayer practice, whatever that means to you, to like sit and silence all the noise that's constantly around us and just like silence it and pray or meditate to kind of allow ourselves to connect with whatever that is, right? Whatever we want to think that it is. And then really also listening to my body that on some days, maybe I can't get up as early and I can't move. And that's okay too, right? Maybe I need a little bit more rest that day. Or especially because a lot of, again, the work that I do is volunteer, it's not that like the money is the important part, but like if I was making the income from it, then there would be a little bit more of like, well, I need to do this thing. But there was still times when I was like, I'm exhausted from the day before. I maybe was talking with somebody. It was really emotional. It was really hard. And now I'm supposed to volunteer at the hospital. And I know that that's going to be hard. Well, you know,
Mhm.
it maybe today I'm not going to volunteer, like listening to that and really acknowledging the fact that it's okay to feel things. You know, I think sometimes there's this idea of like, well, we're professionals. I shouldn't feel overwhelmed. I shouldn't feel the grief. I shouldn't feel the sadness. Well, no, we're going to feel
Mm.
it, but it's important to like listen to our bodies. And when I have had an emotional day, because sometimes it is emotional and for different reasons. I mean, sometimes families are really fighting as people near the end of life. That's the
Yeah.
hardest thing, I think, for me is to hold space for that. I can
Yeah.
hold space for the person that's dying. I could sit with the person that's dying. I can hold their hand the moment they die. And afterwards, I will mainly be like, okay, I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm going to like calm myself. I'll be okay. But when the families start fighting and I'm trying to hold space for that, that's a hard one for me. And so then
Mm.
I'll come home and I'll say, you know, this is not mine. It is not mine to hold. I'll sometimes, even when I take a shower, like imagine it like washing all of it away, going
Mm.
outside, grounding myself, like doing whatever it is that works to bring us back to our center and back to the fact that even the things that we're experiencing, especially again, if I'm at the hospital and it's like a younger person, like I've sat with some people that were pretty young and were
Yeah.
dying, and it
Yeah.
touches that like fear of mine of it being one of my children. I come home, it's not my children though. Not now.
Mm-mm.
Not this time. Hopefully never will be, but it's not my children. And then also like hugging them and loving on them and telling them how grateful I am that they've been in my life. Like it has totally changed me as well with that. This like gratitude for everything that I have in my life, the gratitude for being here in this physical body. Like in some ways, we don't really appreciate that. And how cool is it that we can like taste things and we can touch things and we can move and we can like do all these things in this physical body that will not be here forever. And so it's given me so much more gratitude and appreciation. And I think sometimes too, just that practice of saying, I'm really grateful. Life's not perfect. The body's not perfect, but I'm really grateful for being here. Then also
Mhm.
helps me to show up for people that are nearing the end of that and saying, like, all right, I understand, like, this is hard. This is a difficult transition, but we're going to do it together. And I will be here to support you through it. But having something in place that you do regularly will make a big difference in the way that you process the things that are happening.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that, that seeing it as a daily practice and the hygiene example that's just spot on because it couldn't be more true, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
Taking kind of constant inventory. That's where, I've said before, my meditation practice has become a non-negotiable. And, end of
Mm-hmm.
the day, I usually have more of kind of like a reflection time and, just thinking about gratitude and all the things. The death and dying really kind of can bring those just even more into hyper focus for us, right? Of all the sweetness in life.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Jill, I've just loved this conversation. I've taken away a lot. I really want to thank you for being here. Is there anything that you'd like to leave listeners with?
I think the biggest thing that I always want to encourage people to do is to not be afraid to think about the fact that one day we will all die, because it really will help you live life better now while we're still here. So don't be
Mm.
afraid to do it. It's okay. It'll be all right every day, just for like a little tiny bit. Think about it, because it really will change the way that you live.
That's definitely like a perfect place to end. So, thank you so much for being on the Legacy of Love podcast. And we will include all your contact information and where to reach you and find you in the show notes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was beautiful.